When you lock murderers, sex offenders, and psychopaths together, it's only a matter of time before someone starts a fight, and guards are usually caught in the crossfire. Like this officer, who tried separating a fight and ended up almost going blind, or these inmates who ganged up on two prison guards. Even the female guards aren't spared, and for these women, it can get worse than just violence. These are some of the guards who messed with the wrong inmate. Let's begin with Ryan Young. Picture this. A riot breaks out at Bridgend HMP Park's Young Offender Unit in Wales, and things spiral way out of control. Two teenagers, Finley Phillips, 16 at the time, and Marzin Moshen, 17, turn on prison guard Ryan Young in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. It all started on July 18, 2021, when a fight broke out in a communal area after another inmate smacked Phillips in the face. Guard Ryan Young, who was just trying to keep the peace, stepped in and ended up as the target of a vicious attack. CCTV footage captured Phillips punching him and stomping on his head, while Moshen joined in after Ryan was already down, delivering even more blows. The scene? Absolute chaos. Ryan was found unconscious on the floor, drifting in and out of it with a nasty cut above his eye. He was rushed to the hospital and couldn't return to work for 8 weeks. Both teens ended up in court, where the footage of their attack left no room for excuses. Moshen and Phillips were sent to a young offender institution for 5 months and 16 months respectively. Next, a case similar to this, where an inmate beat a female guard so badly she had to be admitted to the hospital. Here's the story of Captain Elizabeth Sturdivant. Okay, get ready for this one. It's as infuriating as it is shocking. At Rikers Island, Captain Elizabeth Sturdivant was just doing her job, issuing an infraction to inmate Jesse Blount for beating another prisoner when things took a violent turn. Instead of accepting the write-up, Blount lost it and launched a brutal attack. Sturdivant tried to follow the facility's new use of force policy, which requires officers to use pepper spray first and avoid hitting inmates in the face. She used the spray as directed, but it didn't even slow Blount down. He punched her repeatedly, leaving her with 2 black eyes and a massive hematoma on her forehead, before other officers finally stepped in to help. Luckily, he was reprimanded and will not be beating any guards anytime soon, but somehow, his story pales in comparison to the murderous Thomas Edward Silverstein. Thomas Silverstein, a name that was so popular in the history of the federal penitentiary system, passed away on May 11th at the age of 67. Known as one of the most dangerous prisoners in America, Silverstein spent an unparalleled 35 years in solitary confinement. Silverstein's descent into criminality began in 1978 when he was sent to prison for robbery, but things escalated dramatically behind bars. While serving his time, he was accused of murdering an inmate, which led to his transfer to the maximum security prison in Marion, Illinois. Though his first murder conviction was overturned, he went on to kill 2 inmates and fatally stabbed a prison guard in 1983. That final act sealed his fate, branding him a lifelong hazard to the system. His reputation as a member of the Aryan Brotherhood further fueled his isolation. Authorities deemed him too dangerous for the general population, confining him to a 6 by 7 foot cell under constant surveillance, with the lights never turned off. For decades, Silverstein lived with virtually no human interaction, a punishment some compared to being buried alive. Even from his isolation, he voiced the inhumanity of his conditions, calling it worse than death. What do you think? Did he deserve it? Next, let's move to a prison in Massachusetts, where a violent brawl started and several guards were stabbed. Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. At Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, a violent attack by inmates left 5 correctional officers injured, including one who was stabbed 12 times and suffered a punctured lung. The attack started when an inmate ambushed a CO from behind near a cell, stabbing him repeatedly with a homemade shiv. As the officer fought back, more inmates joined in, creating complete chaos. Other officers rushed in to help, leading to a wild struggle as they tried to contain the situation. The whole ordeal was caught on video, and it's so graphic that it's hard to watch. The correctional union described the officers' actions as heroic, pointing out their determination to survive and protect each other. They emphasized that the officers' quick response saved lives and demonstrated incredible bravery. But if you think this was bad, wait till you hear what happened to one Cook County Jail guard. Over at Cook County Jail, a guard was ambushed and brutally beaten by inmates during a safety check, an attack caught on video and now raising major questions about officer safety. Here's how it went down. The officer, a recent hire, was ordered by a supervisor to perform a safety round in a dorm all by himself. Big mistake. Jail policy requires backup, but apparently that was ignored. During his round, an inmate, Malik Daniel, sucker punched him and stomped on his head. It only stopped when another inmate surprisingly stepped in. To make things worse, no one called 911 after the attack, and the officer waited hours to be seen at the jail's medical facility. Union leaders are furious, saying this could have been avoided entirely if protocols had been followed. Instead, the supervisor stayed in their cozy office while the guard faced danger alone. Thankfully, the officer wasn't severely injured and could walk away, though he briefly passed out on his way home. Malik Daniel, already jailed for attacking another officer, is now facing new aggravated battery charges. This incident just shows how a single lapse in judgment can put lives at risk, just like what happened to the Spring Hill prison guards. This one is as chaotic as it gets. At Spring Hill Prison, what started as an unprovoked attack on a guard quickly escalated into an all-out brawl involving multiple inmates. Chrome Wilson, a convicted burglar already serving a 10-month sentence, decided to jump into the fray, and things got ugly fast. It all kicked off on September 7th, 2022, when guards were escorting prisoners back to their cells after yard time. One inmate randomly began punching a corrections officer, while Wilson saw his moment and ambushed a second guard from behind, landing a series of punches that knocked him to the ground. Not done yet, Wilson grabbed a plastic chair and joined his co-offender, threatening staff and even raising the chair like he was ready to throw it. The chaos lasted several minutes as more staff arrived to get things under control. By the end of it, one guard had a fractured eye socket, broken teeth, and cuts, while the other was left bruised and battered. Despite Wilson's attempts to escalate the violence, the guards managed to regain control. In court, Wilson was slapped with an 18-month sentence for wounding with intent to injure, added to his burglary term. Just another day of mayhem in the yard. Next, a story of an unauthorized tattoo turned into a violent brawl. Monterey County deputies. Things got seriously out of hand at Monterey County Jail when what started as a simple rule violation turned into a full-blown brawl. Around 6 p.m. on a Sunday, two deputies in the K-Block unit were responding to reports of a prisoner getting an unauthorized tattoo, but things escalated in seconds. One inmate backed away from the deputies, and before anyone could react, 4 more prisoners jumped in, surrounding the officers and attacking them with their fists. The chaos hit a new level when one of the inmates grabbed a deputy's baton and used it to strike the officer on the head and back. If that wasn't enough, the baton was later thrown and hit another deputy. Backup arrived quickly, and after a brief struggle, order was restored. A search of the housing unit revealed narcotics, adding to the mess. In the end, 3 deputies were injured in the fight. 2 were taken to the hospital by ambulance, while a third went via patrol vehicle. Thankfully, they were all treated and released. Now, 5 inmates are looking at extra charges for this wild attack. What began as a simple tattoo violation spiraled into a serious incident that no one will forget anytime soon. Now, let's talk about the Sierra Conservation Center correctional officer. A correctional officer at Sierra Conservation Center in Tuolumne County ended up in the hospital after being attacked by an inmate. Thankfully, the officer was treated and released, but CDCR is keeping tight-lipped about the details of what went down. Here's what we know so far. The inmate, who's already serving a life sentence, has been moved to restricted housing while investigators dig into what happened. CDCR made it clear that their top priority is keeping staff safe, but they're holding back on more details for now, saying it's all part of the ongoing investigation. As for charges, nothing yet. The Tuolumne County District Attorney's Office hasn't seen any reports or filed anything against the inmate. Even the crimes that landed this person in prison in the first place are under wraps. The Inspector General's office got involved too, calling it a critical incident. They even sent someone to the prison to keep an eye on how the situation was handled. Now all eyes are on the investigation to see if this inmate is going to face even more legal trouble for the attack. This is a reminder of how dangerous things can get for guards, even in what's supposed to be a controlled environment. Just imagine what happened at St. Louis City Justice Center. On a Sunday night, 2 inmates attacked a correctional officer, stole his radio and pepper spray, and armed themselves with a broomstick. This happened around 8:30 p.m. when the guard was just returning an empty trash can to a cell. Talk about catching someone off guard. The officer ended up with facial injuries and had to be treated at the hospital, but was later released. What's crazy is that this isn't the first time something like this has gone down. Just 2 months before this attack, another guard was attacked. That time, the inmates stole his radio, keys, and pepper spray, and things spiraled into chaos when they freed 40 to 50 other inmates from their cells. It turned into what the Corrections Commissioner called a hostage situation, but others described it as an all-out riot. To make matters worse, the jail has already been under fire with 10 inmate deaths in just 2 years. It's clear there are some serious issues here, And it doesn't help that they've had to hire private contractors to fill in because of a staffing shortage. Things are boiling over, and it's not looking good for anyone inside. A very similar situation happened to the Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility guards. The Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility turned into a battleground on a Tuesday evening when 5 inmates launched a brutal attack on 2 guards. The chaos erupted after a routine medication delivery to the pod escalated into violence. According to New Mexico State Police, the confrontation left both correctional officers with severe but non-life-threatening injuries. One officer has since been released from the hospital, while the other remains hospitalized. The inmates involved: Gabriel Cedillo, 47, Rico Sena, 32, Robert Diment, 35, Irvin Ramirez, 26, and Martin Cuevas, 35. Are now facing a slew of serious charges. Cedillo and Sena are at the center of the incident, charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault on a peace officer, possession of a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Meanwhile, Diment, Cuevas, and Ramirez face charges of aggravated assault, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The attack unfolded around 7:30 p.m. when a nurse, escorted by a sergeant and an officer, entered the pod to administer medication. During this time, one inmate became confrontational with a control center officer. After the nurse left, the sergeant and officer returned to enforce a lockdown, but tensions boiled over. By 9 p.m., the inmates surrounded the pod door and attacked the guards. Quick action from a control officer, who used a less lethal shotgun and pepperball grenades, managed to stop the violence before it escalated further. A facility response team secured the pod shortly after. Next, a prisoner getting booked attacks a Racine County correctional officer. It's not every day you hear about a 17-year-old taking on a correctional officer, but that's exactly what happened in Racine County, Wisconsin. Surveillance footage captured Deontay Anderson, a teenager already being booked on an armed robbery charge, attacking a correctional officer in the holding area. The incident unfolded as Anderson was being processed into the facility. For reasons unknown, he suddenly turned on the officer, escalating a tense situation into a physical altercation. The shocking moment was all caught on video, showing Anderson's brazen and aggressive behavior. The officer managed to subdue Anderson, but the damage had already been done, both physically and legally. Anderson's actions didn't just raise eyebrows, they added another serious charge to his record. He now faces an additional battery charge for assaulting a correctional officer, a crime that carries its own hefty consequences. This incident is yet another example of how quickly things can spiral out of control in high-stress environments, leaving everyone worse off than before. Mind you, this is exactly what happened to a Rikers Island CO. So here's the wild story from Rikers Island. This guy, Timer Bay Foster, who's already locked up for murder, went completely off the rails. Apparently he got mad because his cell door was locked while he was outside of it, which, you know, is normal jail protocol. But instead of cooling down like a sane person, he snapped. The dude started threatening this 45-year-old correction officer, and when she tried to de-escalate, it didn't work. So she hit him with some pepper spray, straight to the face, but guess what? It didn't do anything. Instead, he punched her so hard her head slammed into the wall, knocking her out. Can you imagine? She ended up with fractures in her face and a deep cut that needed stitches. Other officers eventually subdued him after pepper spraying him again, but the damage was done. Oh, and this guy isn't just any inmate. He's allegedly part of a gang and was locked up for a 2020 murder where he apparently shot someone over a case of mistaken identity. Now, he's facing assault charges on top of his murder case. Another female officer was also attacked at Bridgeport Correctional Center. A female correction officer was doing her routine rounds, minding her own business, when an inmate snapped. Out of nowhere, he grabs her, and it turns into a full-on struggle. He even shoved her into a metal storage bin and started hitting her repeatedly. Can you believe that? The guard ended up in the hospital, but is thankfully back home now, recovering. Ashley McCarthy, a spokesperson for the Department of Correction, said they're deeply troubled by what happened and are looking into ways to make the facility safer. Yeah, clearly something needs to change. The stories of these guards are quite chilling. Take this for example. An Arizona corrections officer was brutally attacked by an inmate at ASPC Lewis in Buckeye on September 3, 2024, and the injuries sound serious, possibly life-changing. So here's what exactly happened to the Lewis prison staff. Inmate Jacob Perdue, who's been in and out of prison since the 90s for everything from burglary to gang activity, apparently decided to add assaulting a guard to his list. Perdue reportedly left the officer with severe injuries during the attack. The Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Re-Entry, ADCRR, didn't share all the details because the investigation is still ongoing, but they moved Perdue to maximum security at Amon Prison right after it happened. He even got hit with 2 disciplinary write-ups for assaulting staff. However, ADCRR promised they're taking this seriously, saying they'll hold Perdue accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Well, that remains to be seen. Now, let's talk about Donte Morris. The trial of Donte Morris was one of those cases that left everyone stunned. Back in June 2010, in Tampa, Florida, 2 police officers, David Curtis and Jeffrey Kokab, pulled Morris over during a traffic stop. It seemed routine, but things turned deadly in seconds. Morris shot both officers in the head, killing them instantly. It was cold, calculated, and shook the entire community. Fast forward to his trial, and the courtroom was packed. People were there to see justice served. One of the biggest moments, when Morris's ex-girlfriend, Ashley Price, testified against him. She pointed him out in court without hesitation, but it was her chilling testimony that stood out. Morris had told her exactly what he did, even describing how he shot the officers and the racial slur he used for them. She revealed that he told her to watch the news because the story was all over it. The emotional impact of this case was massive. Families of the officers gave heart-wrenching statements, with one saying Morris deserved the death penalty without hesitation. In the end, the court agreed. Morris was sentenced to death for his crimes, leaving behind a case that still lingers in people's minds. Morris's case of killing a cop is very similar to that of Mark Anthony Gonzalez. After nearly 13 years, justice was finally served for Bexar County Sheriff's Deputy Kenneth Van, but it was a day filled with raw emotions. Mark Anthony Gonzalez was sentenced to death by Judge Mary Roman in the 175th District Court after being convicted of Van's ambush-style murder in May 2011. The crime was chilling. Deputy Van was sitting in his patrol car at a traffic light in southeast San Antonio when Gonzalez fired a barrage of bullets from an assault rifle, killing him instantly. Gonzalez remained stoic as the judge handed down the death sentence. After the verdict, Van's widow, Yvonne, delivered a heartbreaking victim impact statement. Through trembling words, she shared how deeply her life had been shattered. She described the unbearable loneliness that now defines her world. But luckily, with her husband's killer's death sentence, she may have some sort of peace. However, Gonzalez's case pales in comparison to Luis Bracamontes. This is one of the scariest people you'll ever hear about. He literally laughed at the cops he killed. So, back in 2014, this guy who had been deported several times went on a killing spree in California. And guess who his targets were? Cops. He killed 2 deputies in particular. Deputy Danny Oliver was just doing his job at a traffic stop, and Bracamontes shows up and shoots him in cold blood for absolutely no reason. As if that wasn't bad enough, he goes on to kill another deputy, Michael Davis, later that day. Mind you, he was high on methamphetamine the entire time, drugged up and trigger happy. Luckily, he was caught and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and other crimes. But this man didn't care. He laughed and smirked and said he wanted to kill more cops. Well, the court didn't take his claims lightly, and in 2019, they sentenced him to death. Justice finally caught up with him. Next, the trial of Ashford Thompson. Ashford Thompson's story is as shocking as it is tragic. On July 13, 2008, Twinsburg officer Josh McTarian pulled over Thompson and his girlfriend. What should have been a simple stop escalated. Witnesses say Officer McTarian slammed Thompson onto the hood of his car and threatened him. Thompson retaliated in the most violent way. He pulled out a gun and shot the officer 4 times in the head, killing him instantly. It was a brutal and senseless act that shattered countless lives. The aftermath of McTarian's death was heart-wrenching. His mother gave a devastating statement during the trial, describing how the murder didn't just take her son's life, but hers too. Officer McTarian's wife was equally broken, calling Thompson's actions disgusting as she relived the horror of her husband's final moments. Thompson, seemingly overwhelmed by guilt and the weight of the trial, broke down in court. At one point, he even begged the judge to execute him, but on the day of the verdict, he showed no emotion as the jury found him guilty of aggravated murder. His sentence? The death penalty. This was the same sentence that was given to Quentin Smith. Quentin Smith was accused of killing 2 cops, Eric During and Anthony Morelli, in cold blood. He was charged with aggravated murder and gun possession after shooting both officers while they were responding to a 911 call from his wife. She reported that Smith had assaulted her and was armed. When the officers arrived, things went south real quick. Smith pulled out a gun and shot both of them. The case was dragged out for 2 years, and let me tell you, the courtroom drama was intense. Officers like Timothy Ray and Stacy Pentecost gave emotional testimonies. Ray described the horrifying scene when Officer Morelli, already shot, was trying to keep moving. Then Pentecost spoke about holding Morelli's hand as he was dying, trying to comfort him. After all the back and forth in court, the jury couldn't decide if the reasons for a harsher punishment were stronger than the reasons for a lighter one. In the end, Smith got 2 life sentences without parole. He didn't flinch when the verdict was read, but for the families of the fallen officers, this was the closure they needed. And finally, we have the case of Humberto Delgado, a man accused of killing a Tampa police officer, Corporal Mike Roberts. Humberto Delgado was charged with premeditated murder, aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, carrying a concealed firearm, and depriving an officer of his means of protection. It all went down when Corporal Roberts stopped Delgado, who was pushing a shopping cart. Roberts tried to question him, but Delgado refused, leading to a violent scuffle that ended with Roberts' tragic death. The prosecution made it clear that while Roberts was on the ground, helpless and unmoving, Delgado fired a kill shot with a .45 caliber pistol. The defense, however, argued that Delgado was mentally ill, claiming he believed the police and even rapper 50 Cent were after him. He became convinced that people whom he thought were Masons were plotting against him because he refused to join their group. But, as wild as that sounds, the prosecution pointed out that Delgado said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," which they argued proved he was mentally stable enough to understand his actions. In the end, the judge sentenced Delgado to death. However, years later, the Florida Supreme Court overturned that decision, leaving him with a life sentence without parole. Thanks for joining us today. Check out our other videos for more thrilling content. Enjoy!